Good morning, grade 12. Today we will continue our explanation about human chromosomes. This is part 3. The objective of this part of the section is to determine the difference between X-linked pedigree and autosomal pedigree. We have mentioned earlier in the previous video that sex chromosomes, specifically chromosome number 23, are represented by XX or XY. So, what are autosomes? Autosomes are any chromosomes that are not sex chromosomes. Humans have 22 sets of autosomal chromosomes that most of us carry in almost all of the cells of our body. The other pair, that is number 23 in a karyotype, are called the sex chromosomes. Also, in the previous video, we have discussed the X-linked pedigree. Here, we will discuss the autosomal pedigree. This is an exercise. The following pedigree shows the inheritance of freckles in a family. The allele for freckles is an autosomal dominant allele. Designate the symbols of the alleles. This is the first question. Indicate the genotype of the individuals in all of these 3 generations. And then the third one, what are the phenotypes of generation 2 individual 3 and generation 3 individual 6? Okay, let's first designate the symbols of the alleles. Let big F be the dominant allele for the presence of freckles. Let small f be the recessive allele for no freckles. We will start, of course, with generation number 1, that is the parents. In an autosomal pedigree, since it is not an allele found on the sex chromosomes, then the genotypes are not written on the X of the sex chromosomes. Instead, they are written only with letters that follow the Mendelian heredity. Look at the father. He has no freckles. Then he is recessive for the trait small f, small f. While the mother has freckles. So the first letter is big F, that's for sure. However, we don't know if the mother is homozygous big F, or heterozygous carrier of the normal trait, that is big F, small f. To know, we need to look at the offsprings. Individual 2, 3, and 5 are their children. Individual 2 has no freckles. She must be small f, small f. Each f has to be taken from one parent. Thus, we conclude that the mother is carrier for the normal allele, big F, small f. Individual 3 will be big F, small f, and 5 will also be big F, small f. One from each parent. This individual 2 in generation number 2, marries a male with no freckles, small f, small f. All the offsprings will be the same as the parents, small f, small f. Let's move on to individual 4. She has no freckles, then she is small f, small f. The offsprings in generation 3 are heterozygous dominant for the presence of freckles, big F, small f. Take your time, please, to examine the rest. The third question. The phenotype of generation number 2 individual 3 is a male with freckles, carrier for a normal trait. The phenotype of generation 3 individual 6 is a male with no freckles. This is another example of the autosomal pedigree. The following pedigree shows the inheritance of the lung disease cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is an autosomal recessive allele. First of all, designate the symbols and indicate the genotype of the individuals in all of the 3 generations. Now let's designate the symbols of the alleles. Let big N be the dominant allele for the absence of cystic fibrosis, and small n be the recessive allele for the presence of cystic fibrosis. The mother has cystic fibrosis in generation number 1. Then she will be small n. What about the father? The father does not have the disease, so he will be big N for the absence of cystic fibrosis. Now let's take a minute and think about the second allele or letter for the father. He can be either homozygous with big N or heterozygous with big N, small n. If we look at the offsprings, we will notice that all are free of the disease. However, there is a probability and a chance for these couples to get a 5th or maybe a 6th child with the disease of cystic fibrosis. That's why the father can be either big N or big N, small n. All the offspring in the generation number 2 are with no disease, so they are big N, small n. The female on the left, big N, small n, she will marry a male that doesn't have the disease, so the first letter will be big N. However, we don't know if the male is a carrier for cystic fibrosis. In order for us to know, we need to look at their offspring. The male in the 3rd generation has the disease. He is small n. Then we conclude that the father must be a carrier and thus he will be big N, small n. Let's move on to the girls of the 3rd generation. Both girls have to carry one allele from each parent. That is, either they can be big N, or they can be big N, small n. This is the homework. Exercise number 1. The polycystic kidney disease is an autosomal dominant trait characterized by the growth of cysts in the kidneys. The following is a pedigree of 3 generations. Designate the symbols of the corresponding alleles. The first question. Number 2. Indicate all the genotypes of the 3 generations. And 3. Indicate the phenotype of generation number 1, individual 3 and 4, generation number 2, individual 5. This is a bigger picture of the pedigree. Please make sure to draw it on your copybook and solve the following. The second pedigree or exercise is the following. This pedigree tracks Duchenne muscular dystrophy or DMD through several generations. DMD is an X-linked recessive trait. First of all, designate the symbols of the alleles and indicate the genotypes of all of the 3 generations. Number 3, indicate the phenotype of generation 1, individual 2, generation 2, individual 4, and generation 3, individual 2. This is the pedigree for DMD in a bigger picture. Please make sure to draw it on your copybook and solve the genotypes of the 3 generations. End of section 14.1. Thank you.